Celebrating Mandela and a momentous milestone. The former activist, prisoner and president turned 95 on Thursday. The world pays homage to an international icon who helped end apartheid in South Africa. But has South Africa lived up to Nelson Mandela's vision? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Nelson Mandela is spending his 95th birthday in hospital in Pretoria. But throughout South Africa and indeed around the world, his birthday and his achievements are being celebrated. School children across the country set the scene.
Happy birthday, dear Madiba. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Well wishers have also been praising the man regarded as the father of the non-racial Rainbow Nation. And current President Jacob Zuma thanked South Africans for responding to a call to give Mandela the biggest birthday celebrations ever. Nelson Mandela has been receiving intensive treatment in hospital for a recurring lung infection since June the 8th. He's been critically ill, but his family says he's been showing steady signs of improvement.
He's been sitting up in his chair. He's been watching TV with his headphones on. He smiles more. He responds, much quicker and regularly. And today is a celebration of his 95th birthday. We, of course, are surrounded by love and support and prayers all around wherever we go.
Mandela was jailed for 27 years under white minority rule. He led a difficult transition from apartheid to democracy, becoming South Africa's first democratic president in 1994. The ruling African National Congress said the world was paying homage to Mandela on his birthday, celebrating a life dedicated to the liberation of South Africans and people all over the world, and inextricably linked to the struggle of the people of South Africa for freedom, liberty and dignity. But has Nelson Mandela's legacy been assured? Let's bring in our guest to discuss this. In Johannesburg, Murphy Morobi, one of the student leaders of the Soweto uprising in 1976. He spent time in prison and subsequently in government with Nelson Mandela. In Brasilia, Saths Cooper, a leading psychologist and one of the founders of the Black Consciousness movement, who also shared a cell block with Mandela. Saths is currently visiting Brazil but joins us on Skype. And also in Johannesburg, Louise Gubb, a photographer who's recorded the momentous years leading to the end of apartheid, Mandela's release and the new democratic order that followed. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Louise Gubb. Like millions of others, the first time you saw Nelson Mandela in the flesh was when he walked out of the Victor Verster prison. What was going through your mind on that day?
Well, it was pretty chaotic, but it was the most exhilarating day, Mike. And then, of course, when he came down to City Hall, he drove straight through. He couldn't get out. The crowds were just so enormous. They were just overwhelming. And he eventually went onto the balcony of City Hall using the rear entrance much later on, almost towards evening. So it was an amazing day. It's a day I don't think anyone will ever forget if they were in South Africa or South African at the time, or in the world, I guess.
Well, Murphy Morobi, what was your first impression when you went onto Robben Island and the first time you saw Nelson Mandela in the prison?
For those of us who went to Robben Island, the sight of Nelson Mandela, and in this instance accompanied by his comrade Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, passing by our section of the prison, was always an occasion that brought our sections to a halt. We'll all rush to the fence to sing and to shout, "Power, power, power," and it was always such a moment, because having gone to prison, to Robben Island at the time, having grown in the township with Mandela as a concept in my mind that always was spoken about in harsh tones. And there it was history placing me in the same space with a man of his stature. And that to me was an absolutely exhilarating moment.
Well, Sats Cooper, your first impression when you went into the same cell block with Nelson Mandela, roughly the same time as Murphy Morobe, following the student uprising throughout the country?
Well, Mandela was an imposing figure. He was somebody who carried a certain aura about him, and that aura was bound to infect you. If you weren't infected by it, I think there was something wrong with you. So our first encounter was at the end of 1976 when we got to Robben Island prison. And from there, over the years until just a week before he was removed to Portsmouth prison in April 1982, we spent time in the same cell block. And he was a very considerate person. Very thoughtful, but also had very firm views about issues, views which we shared and which we argued over and discussed. And in all of this, he displayed a certain graciousness which has carried him through, becoming the first iconic president of our country.
Louise Gubb, let's just go to you. For so many years, Nelson Mandela's image was banned, his writings were banned, books about him were outlawed, and yet his name was on the lips of so many at those rallies that you covered through the 1980s. How do you think this influence was exerted, the influence of Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, people sitting in a prison, and yet the names are being chanted by youths at protest rallies?
Well, of course, it drove the authorities crazy whenever they came out, the protesters and the youths, whenever they came out with what they imagined were the images of their leaders. And it was forbidden at the time for anyone to have the images or even to mention the names or even to have anything about Mandela in the newspaper. So I think in a way it enhanced his image, because it was so secretive and it was so forbidden. And of course, everybody loves what's forbidden.
Well, Murphy Morobe, when you took to the streets in 1976 with other Soweto school pupils protesting against the use of Afrikaans in schools, was the name of Mandela known to you? Was it something that inspired you and the others who took on the forces of apartheid beginning on that day?
You know, for us at that time as young people, as I said, because Nelson Mandela was in prison, the ANC was banned, and we could not speak publicly about those organizations or individuals. But amongst ourselves in small groups, in discussion groups, we would talk about them. We would actually get access to some of their writings or listen to Radio Freedom, which will talk about Nelson Mandela and those of our comrades who are in prison. And when we eventually went to prison, it was with such great air of expectation that we are now at least going to be linked with someone who, in fact, our parents would only talk about in harsh tones. So whilst in the 1976 era, you know, we took up the struggle and would talk via inference without necessarily being direct. Later on, when we came out of jail in 1982, it was also the time when the process of moving Nelson Mandela from Robben Island to the outside prison had already began. And we came out of prison and started forming youth congresses throughout the length and breadth of the country. But by then, our own spirits, having come out of prison, were so elevated that we didn't care anymore. We knew that Nelson Mandela is somebody that we had to fight to get out of prison, because our people needed him and our country needed him.
Well, Sats Cooper, you were fighting apartheid on the one hand, but on the other hand, you were also in opposition to the African National Congress politically. So when you got to Robben Island, Nelson Mandela was actually your political rival. Did he attempt to convert you?
No. Madiba always had a respect for anyone's views, and that, I think, has carried him through to be the great reconciler in South Africa. His own views were very deeply etched in his experience and linked to the African National Congress's policies. But he was able to reach across all barriers, and that's why you have a man who is loved by every segment of society. You hardly find anybody who is mean enough not to give him the rightful accord that he deserves.
Well, Murphy Morobe, the image was always very affable most of the time, but many argued that Nelson Mandela was also very insistent when he wanted to get his own way. You will remember the huge debate within the ANC when Nelson Mandela wanted to lower the voting age before the first democratic elections. He was a man who very much wanted and wants his own way, is he not?
Well, I mean, he had a very strong personality. Even in the prison context, we had some heated debates in those environments. Even given the constraints that we had to engage in those debates, Nelson Mandela has always come across as somebody of strong convictions. If he had a position, you had to really dig deep in order to convince him otherwise. But the beauty about him is that once he's convinced, he would embrace that idea as if it was his own idea in the first instance. So for me, those were some of the lessons I got in political leadership and in political education about the importance of openness in debate, the importance of respecting other people's ideas, but remaining firm of conviction, especially where matters of principle are concerned. And I think that is one of the fundamental lessons that the concept of Nelson Mandela actually leaves us with.
Well, he was very strong politically, but it does seem as well that all reserves, all pretenses, all political things dropped away when he was around children. Louise Gubb, there seemed to be in Nelson Mandela a childlike soul that would emerge any time that there was anybody under 5 foot around him.
He just loved children. He said that what he missed most when he was in prison was the presence of children, because he was kept away from children for 27 years. He wasn't even able to go to his own son's funeral. And the amazing thing, though, is not only that Mandela had such a wonderful soft spot for children, but they do for him. I mean, you'll see in all the photographs, it's extraordinary how the children react to Madiba. They seem to sense. They're not scared of him or anything. I mean, you know, he's a president, and he goes to some little child in a township, and the child will tell him their dreams. He really is remarkable in that way.
Well, let's just take a look at a montage of Louise Gubb's photos of Mandela and children.
Yes, hello. How are you? Well, I'm going to make a rhyme for you. Can I?
Yes!
When I was young like you, I used to say, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Yes? All right, let's sing. Well, you know it better than I do. Eh? Very good. Now, who wants to be a teacher amongst you? Good. Oh, good. And who wants to be a nurse? Very good. And who wants to be a president?
Well, those images show the one side of Nelson Mandela, but he was the first to decry the image of a saint. One of his quotes, "I'm not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who kept on trying." Sats Cooper, this seems to be a very important part of Nelson Mandela's personality as well. The acknowledgement that he makes mistakes, that he made mistakes, that nobody can be perfect. This is truly important, is it not?
Yes, it is very critical because he encouraged the engagement of people who had differing views. And in that, I think he succeeded very largely to ensure that those who were in opposition to his policies were brought over. He had a certain persistence, but he also listened very carefully to the issues so that he was able to best others who had other views. And he, unfortunately, was succeeded by people who have not had that kind of ability to show greatness, to show in victory the grace that is required of a truly great leader.
Well, Murphy Morobi, that brings us to the point of the legacy, the handing over. There does appear to be a degree of national disappointment with the current leadership, for example, the same party as Nelson Mandela, many arguing that the promises of the African National Congress and Nelson Mandela and the other leaders of his generation have not been realized in these 2 decades of democracy.
You know, I think we all engage in self-reflection increasingly in South Africa, especially those of us who spent time in prison, who went into jail, who got tortured, who fought for freedom. We reflect on some of the things we experience, but notwithstanding some of the challenges and the negativity that seems to be around in some areas of life, personally, I'm quite convinced that the preponderance of forces for good and for changing our society are pointing in the right direction. Because if it was otherwise, our situation will be much more chaotic than what some people might be experiencing. The fact of the matter is that you spoke now about Nelson Mandela and him saying that you must not consider him as a saint. One of the fundamental political lessons we were taught in prison by people like Mandela and Sisulu was on the whole question of cult of personality and how, in fact, it was drummed into us that we should not allow a situation where personality cults becomes a way in which our politics is defined. And hence it was Nelson Mandela who, at the pinnacle of his presidency, stepped down and allowed, in fact, of transition to take place. And that, to me, is one of the greatest legacies that Nelson Mandela has left us. The sense that we are here to contribute to the betterment of society, but we should never confuse that with our right to remain in power inordinately, because democracy, after all, is in the end has to be seen through the eyes of the children that Nelson Mandela was talking about. And when you ask me what is the defining moment in my experience of Nelson Mandela, it's always the way he looked and felt when he was in the presence of children. In fact, the message that comes across there is that he did what he did not for himself, but for future generations. Now, we're going through difficult times, not only in South Africa, but world economies are going through difficulties. And I think that some of those difficulties wrap up on us, but also we make serious mistakes. It is important that on our current leadership, you need to have a sense that they would grow up to be able to look at those mistakes and be self-reflective and accept the criticism that will come whenever they make those mistakes. Because after all, what we have to achieve is bigger than what an individual can attain.
Well, Louise Gab, during the recent months of Nelson Mandela's ill health, there's almost been a sense of national despair in South Africa. Why do you think the state of the nation, the psychological nature of the nation, is linked to Nelson Mandela's health? Is there perhaps a moment of reflection of how good it was, how much hope there was? Has the hope lying with Nelson Mandela in his hospital bed? Is that what the people think?
I think it's simple. I think it's just like Murphy said, he crosses all boundaries, he crosses all cultures. He reached out to everybody. He went to see Betsy Verwoerd. He reached out to the Afrikaners. He reached out to everyone he could reach out to. And so he's universally loved. And no one likes to see someone you love ill and having a hard time. So I think everyone gets very sad, and that generally affects the mood of the whole country.
Well, Sats Cooper, do you think as well that there's perhaps an element of comparison of people looking at the present government and thinking, wow, how did we get here?
I think comparisons are inevitable. I think that sometimes they're invidious because they may do a disservice to the greatness of somebody like Mandela, who can only be comparable, I think, to the likes of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and so on, and will go down in history with that pantheon. However, I think that it's inevitable that people will look at the hopefulness that was quite evident 20 years ago when he was released from prison, and his accession as the first democratic leader of our country, his ability to reach out to all sections of the community so that he broke those barriers down very seriously. His successors handpicked Mbeki, and in turn we have what we have right now, I think reflected probably a lapse in judgment. I know that Madiba did not want a succession battle, so he anointed Mbeki at Mangaung, the ANC conference in Mangaung. However, that sort of precluded a democratic tradition in the ANC and perhaps gave Mbeki a sense of his own superiority way beyond his ability. He did have enormous intellectual capacity, but his ability to reach out to people and understand the issues confronting people.
Well, if I could just interrupt you at this moment, Sats, apologies, but we're getting to the end of the show, and I want to go to Murphy Morobe with one very important question. Why is it so important that everybody celebrate this birthday on this day?
There is something in the notion of Nelson Mandela that we all feel good about. Maybe. Perhaps when you look at our lives today, there might be instances where we feel certain things are missing. But I think when ordinary people amass outside the hospital in Pretoria and throughout the world, actually shouting and singing the name of Nelson Mandela, it is a message that has to go to our leaders to actually tell them to listen a little bit more on what ordinary people say they want. What is embodied in the spirit and of Nelson Mandela is what people say needs to be brought back to be reinculcated and deepened into the frame of our society. Because in Nelson Mandela, everybody in this country had and found hope.
Louise Gubb, very quickly, why do you think this birthday should be especially celebrated?
Well, he always celebrated his birthday by having a party. He gave a party for all the children of South Africa. He would choose different groups of underprivileged children. And he taught us all to try and give to the less fortunate among us. And that's what Mandela Day is all about.
Well, thank you to my guests, Murphy Morobe, Sats Cooper, and Louise Gubb. And don't forget, you can find this show and many more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the link for the shows. And also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And why not leave us your comments there too. Thanks for watching. Happy birthday, Nelson Mandela. And from me, Mike Hanna, goodbye for now.